So today's lesson is on adding and subtracting rational numbers. So when you're working on adding and subtracting rational numbers, certain things to keep in mind is to make sure you rewrite the problems. If you ever see two signs next to each other, make sure if you see a negative and a positive next to each other, that turns to a negative. And if you see two negatives, that's going to turn into a positive. Also remember that you can't add and subtract fractions if they have different denominators. So make sure that you convert them to common denominators. The final thing to think about is if you have the same signs, add, and if you have different signs, subtract. One important skill that you need to know how to do for this lesson is you need to know how to subtract fractions and especially how to regroup fractions when subtracting. If you do not know how to do that, this lesson will be a lot harder for you. So if you have negative 13 and 5/7 plus 6 minus 2/7, we don't need to do the first step, which is rewriting the problem, because I don't see two signs that are next to each other. We also do not need to convert to common denominators right now because I see 5/7 and 2/7, so I'm going to leave that alone. I'm going to jump straight to step 3. It says same signs add, different subtract. I have different signs, so I'm going to subtract. When you do this, completely ignore the signs. We'll bring the signs back afterwards, or else it'll be confusing. Just put whatever number is bigger on top, 13 and 5/7, and then the smaller number on the bottom. Make sure you line up your ones, tens, hundreds, and your fractions. So right now, just ignore the signs. Ignore the negative 13, ignore the positive 6. So if I have 5/7 minus 0/7, that's going to give me 5/7. And if I have 13 minus 6, it's going to give me 7. And I know my answer is going to be, now I look back up here to see whether my answer is going to be positive or negative. I know my answer is going to be negative because the absolute value of negative 13 and 5/7 is bigger than the absolute value of 6. So now I'm going to rewrite the problem. So now I know I have negative 7 and 5/7 because these together equal negative 7 5/7 minus 2/7. So now I know that I have the same sign, so I have to add. So I can do this in my head, or if you want to line it up and add it like this, that's fine as well. 7 and 5/7. Make sure you line up your fractions, plus 2/7. So I know 5/7 plus 2/7 gives you 7/7. And then I get 7 and 7/7. I know 7/7 also equals to 1. So if I add that to 7, that'll give me 8. And now, last step, try to see if my answer is positive or negative. Both of these are negative, so I know my answer is obviously going to be negative 8. So I know my first step says to rewrite the problem. I don't need to do this step because I don't see two signs next to each other. Then it says convert to common denominators. I do need to do this step. So I know my least common multiple, if I skip count by 4 and 5, will be 20. So I know my least common multiple will be 20. So this will be negative 2. And I would have to multiply 4 by 5 to get to 20. And I'll also have to multiply my numerator by the same number. I'll have to multiply 5 by 4 to get to 20, which means I'll have to multiply my numerator by 4 as well. I have to multiply 5 by 4 to get to 20, which means I have to multiply my numerator by 4 as well. So now I rewrote the problem, negative 2 and 5/20 plus 3 and 8/20 minus 12/20. So the next thing that I'm going to do is same signs add, different subtract, which is step 3. I have different signs, so I'm going to subtract. So what I'm going to do right now is just completely ignore the signs and just put the bigger number on top. So 3 and 8/20 minus 2 and 5/20. I know 8/20 minus 5/20 gives me 3/20. Sorry, I don't have any space, so I'm writing it over here. And I know 3 minus 2 gives me 1. Now, is my answer going to be positive or negative? It's definitely going to be positive. So my answer is 1 and 3/20. However, I'm not done because I still have to subtract 12/20 from that. to give me my final answer. So now I have this equals 1 3/20 minus 12/20. So if I have 1 3/20, I'm going to go ahead and rewrite it and line it up. Minus 12/20. So what I'm going to do is regroup. That turns to 0. And instead of putting that 1 over here, I'm going to turn that into 20 over 20. So this is the same thing as 23 over 20. Minus 12/20. So I know 23 minus 12 gives me 11. And you know when you're subtracting fractions, your denominators could stay the same. So my answer is 11/20. So for this next problem, you don't need to do step 1. We're going to move straight to step 2. It says convert to common denominators. All right, I'm not going to do this step because that's actually going to add more steps towards the end. So we're just going to leave it how it is. Because we have a solid integer, -10, we're just going to leave it like that. So look, here's what I'm going to do. -10. I know that's the same thing as plus 5 and also plus 1/8. So if I break up 5 and 1/8 into two different numbers, I can break it up into 5 plus 1/8 gives you 5 and 1/8. So I'm going to do that. The reason why I'm going to do that is because it makes it easier for me to add and subtract integers than to add and subtract rational numbers. So if I have -10 plus 5, I know this gives me -5. Now I have -5 plus 1/8. So we know when you have same signs add, different subtract. In this case, they're different. So I'm going to ignore the signs now, and I'm going to do 5 minus 1/8. That's the same thing as saying 4 and 8/8 minus 1/8. So I get 7/8 when I do 8/8 minus 1/8, and then I get 4 and 7/8. So now if I look back over here, I know my answer is going to take the sign of the number with the greatest absolute value, which is obviously -5. So my answer will be -4 and 7/8. So I do need to do my first step because I see two signs next to each other. So I'm going to go ahead and rewrite that problem. -5 and 5/7 plus 8. And I know if I have a positive and negative, that's going to equal a negative. Minus 3 and 2/7 equals. All right, so I have different signs, so I need to subtract. So I'm going to take the bigger number and subtract it from the smaller one. If I have 8, and I'll just do it up here, minus 5 and 5/7, that's also the same thing as 7 and 7/7. So 7/7 minus 5/7 is going to give me 2/7. 7 minus 5 is going to give me 2. So I have 2 and 2/7. And I know it's going to be a positive 2 and 2/7. So now I have 2 and 2/7 minus 3 and 2/7. So again, I have different signs. So I'm going to need to subtract. If I have, and I'll just do it to this little corner over here and make some space. If I have 3 and 2/7 minus 2 and 2/7, I know 2/7 minus 2/7 give me 0. I'm just not going to write anything. 3 minus 2 is going to give me 1. And I know my answer is going to take the sign of the number with the greatest absolute value, which will be -3 and 2/7. So it'll take that negative sign. So my answer will be -1. So for this next problem, I'm going to rewrite. When you have a negative sign outside of a parentheses, it's going to apply to everything within. So everything will technically be opposite if it's a negative sign. So I have negative 5 plus 1 3/4. The reason why I wrote plus is because I had two negatives next to each other. I know when I see two negatives next to each other, that turns to a positive. All right, so now I don't have to do this step. I'm going to jump straight to step 3. Same signs, add, different, subtract. So I have different signs, so I'm going to subtract. Whenever I subtract, I always put the bigger number on top. Ignore the signs for now so you don't get confused. So I have 5 minus 1 3/4. So I know 5 is the same thing as 4 4/4. So 4/4 minus 3/4 is give you 1/4. 4 minus 1 is going to give you 3. So I know our answer is 3 1/4. And I know it's going to take the sign of the number with the greatest absolute value, which is negative 5. So our answer is negative 3 1/4.